Hello everyone and welcome back to Ponderosa North for the love of Bonanza. Well, I'm going to continue on with the story I wrote a couple years ago called His Mother's Son. Like I mentioned before, I try to write these stories as close to an episode as I possibly can, or at least the format of an episode. So I hope you're enjoying it. Here's part 2 of His Mother's Son. Well, can you tell me something about her? He asked shyly. Like the stew, can you at least tell me about the stew? Joe, I'm tired. Oh, please. Tomorrow, we'll talk tomorrow, Adam replied. No, Joe insisted. Now, I have to know now. Adam had turned away from the campfire, and he was just about asleep when Joel jolted him awake with his query. He should have known his little brother wouldn't let it go without an explanation of some kind. He'd have to expose at least one memory to settle him. Stretching his neck over his shoulder, he looked at a seemingly desperate Joe. Adam groaned his approval and flipped himself back over like a trout on a hook. Boy, oh boy, when you want something, you just won't take no for an answer, will you? Joe didn't agree or disagree. He just threw an innocent glance at Adam as he anticipated what he was about to hear. Okay, all right, the stew story, Adam sighed with resignation. Well, it was before you were born. Pa and Marie and Hoss and I went on a hunting trip to get acquainted. Pa sent Hopsing a wire to tell us he was bringing Marie back from New Orleans. They arrived several weeks later. So the four of us packed up and off we went to spend some time together. I think it was around 12. Hoss was 6 or 7. Pa was so happy, happier than I'd ever seen him in a long, long time. Adam grinned with sentiment. It was on that trip that she taught me how to make her grandmother's rabbit stew. I'd caught the rabbit, and I've never forgotten it. I've never heard that story before, Joe said. Not even from Pa. Well, it's hard for him, you know. You still haven't told me why, though, Joe stated boldly, not allowing Adam to divert from the subject. Why what? Why you haven't talked about her before? This is the first time I've ever heard you say anything about my mother. Well, like I said, I have my reasons. Please tell me more. Don't make me beg. I barely knew her, Adam. You knew her best. Won't you even tell me more? Won't you even tell me about my own mother? You're not going to let me sleep, are you? Adam muttered. Nope, Joe grinned impishly. You're a pain, you know that? A real pain. Yep. All right then, Adam grunted. Better make some coffee. Joe almost leapt at the bag of beans and filled the pot of water with his canteen. He mixed them together and placed the pot over the flames. Adam watched the exercise as he stifled a yawn. He hoped the coffee might keep him awake long enough to satisfy Joe's curiosity, but he knew he might be in for a long night. Joe waited patiently for the coffee to brew, and as soon as it did, he poured his brother a cup and passed it to him. There you go, he said. Okay, so what do you want to know? Adam asked casually. Everything. Everything? I can't tell you everything, Joe. Joe thought a moment before he began his interview. Well, why is it so hard to talk about her? Oh, I don't know, Adam began. I guess it's because I feel guilty. Guilty? About what? Well, quite frankly, Joe, I didn't exactly make it easy for your ma. When Pa brought her home, I wasn't very nice to her. I never knew my ma, you know, and then when Pa met Inga, and I kind of thought of her as my mother. I don't think I truly understood until later in my life how much her death affected me. I loved her too. I took it hard, her death. Adam reflected woefully. Hoss never knew her, only me. So when Marie entered my life, I didn't really welcome her with open arms. Well, what about Hoss? Well, Hoss loves everybody. Well, go on, Joe said, wide-eyed, intrigued by the tale. Well, I remember the first time I saw her. She entered the living room of the house with Pa. I was so happy to see her, but he didn't pay much attention to me. Sure, he grabbed both of us up in his arms, but he was so taken with her, it seemed she was all he cared about. Well, that's not true, of course, but to a child who lost 2 mothers already and was so dependent on his father like I was, it was hard. Adam stuck out his lower lip and nodded his head as if the explanation was a new revelation. Well, you can't really blame me for that, Adam. But why do you feel guilty? Oh, I was bad. I was mean to her. I tested her and Pa too. And then you came along. Well, how did you feel about that? Not very good, I'm afraid. Not at the time, anyway. And now? Joe, do you really need to ask me that? No, I guess not. So, It took a long time before I finally realized that I was lucky to have her. She loved me from the start, even though I was a terror. Then, just when we became mother and son, she died. It made me very angry. I was devastated. We all were. Pa was crushed. But he had 3 sons to take care of, so he had no choice but to go on. He had to be strong for all 4 of us. Then to top it off, after the funeral, I ran away. I was gone for days. It just added to Pa's grief. Well, why did you run away, Adam? Well, like I said, I felt guilty about the way I treated her in the beginning, and in hindsight, I think I just couldn't bear to go see Pa go through it again. I don't know, Joe. I was young and confused. It was a trying time for me. It was for all of us. Oh, Joe said simply. So that's it. That's why I don't talk about your mother. I don't talk about Haas's mother either. It's been a long time, but the scars are still there, you know. Adam took a sip of his coffee and paused. He hoped he had received some recognition from Joe that everything was fine. What about me, he asked. What about you? Well, it's like you said, you never really liked me, did you? Joe, I was 12 years old when you were born. The last thing I wanted was a baby around the house. You made a heck of a lot of noise, you know, Adam jabbed with a crooked smile. Aw, come on, Adam, Joe smirked. I guess maybe I've always held you responsible for yet another tragedy in my life. I also had to take care of you when Pa was away on business. You tied me down, and you were a handful, to say the least. I'm sorry. But you don't have to be, Joe. I wouldn't have wanted it any other way. There were good times, too. Really? Yes, really. Now, if there aren't any more issues you'd care to discuss, I'd like to go to sleep. You bet, Adam, Joe replied. You get some sleep. Joe watched Adam throw the dregs of his coffee into the darkness and turn back over. His back was heated by the fire. Joe heard Adam take in a deep breath and then let it out slowly. Joe had never considered his older brother's youth and how much turmoil he'd endured. Joe remembered all the times Adam took him to school and fishing and teaching him how to rope and ride, all the trouble he'd gotten into that Adam had smoothed over, all the birthdays and the Christmases that they had celebrated. No wonder Joe had considered Adam another parent. He truly was. Suddenly, a feeling of warmth surged through his body, and he finally leaned back against his saddle in quiet gratitude. Hey, Adam? Yes, was all Adam could muster. Thanks. For what? Well, for being my older brother and taking care of me. You're welcome, Adam replied wearily. Sleep well, Adam. I will as soon as you stop talking. That's it. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll put a link below of my other fanfic stories, and hopefully you'll visit there and read some. We'll see you soon on Ponderosa North for the love of Bonanza.